I want to thank you very much, Professor Garcia, for coming and agreeing to do this interview. The first question I'm going to ask is, what is translanguaging? What is the goal of translanguaging, and where are we now in terms of translanguage studies?
Translanguaging is the human capacity to make meaning, to select features from your entire language repertoire, and it's the idea that externally we may think that people have 2, 3, 4 languages, but that internally what we have is we have a capacity to communicate, to use language in order to make meaning with others in social interaction. So that is the basic definition. It's a definition that moves away from the idea that there are named languages that are attached to nation states, and instead of looking at the languages of nation states, we look at the language of people and the language practices of people in the repertoire of meaning-making signs that they have, that is, or features that they have, that is both linguistic and multimodal features, gestures, the way you look, the way you hold your body, etc. And that's all part of translanguaging. And we constantly select which features work best for which audience. So, and I think the goal of translanguaging is to get us to think about language as a human capacity that's widely distributed, instead of thinking that languages belong to nation states or to schools, to remember that languages belong to people. And the goal, of course, is to get especially educators, but people in general, to think of this human capacity as again, widely distributed, and so that therefore there's a social justice aspect to translanguaging, because we're not talking about people that have languages, but we're talking about people that do languages, and they do language differently depending on which situation, etc. And the named languages are social constructions, which are very, very important, but it has nothing to do with your cognitive ability or your linguistic ability. So that's the goal, more or less. And where are we? I think we are at the beginning of this. I think that there's still a lot that we don't understand, that I don't understand. And I'm just, I speak about it to make sure that others think about it, and especially that young people change the way they think about who's speaking and how they're listening, because the act of listening is even more important than speaking.
The second question I'm going to ask is, did your move from Cuba influence your studies? If so, what insights did it give to you, and what inspirations?
It's interesting that you asked me this question, because someone just asked me this question and I had thought about it. And I named 4 events in my life that I think were crucial. I don't know if I'll remember the 4 right now, but I'll try. So I remember the first time I understood English. And the reason why I remember it was because I was with a girlfriend who actually was bilingual and who I thought was my friend. And she was talking to the teacher after school, and I didn't understand too much. But I did understand that when she said, I guess something like, "Don't mind her," I don't remember that part too well, but I do remember when she said, "She's just a stupid Cuban girl." And I remember that. And I thought, okay, I'm going to show her that I'm not stupid. I may not speak English, but I'm not stupid. And I think my whole life this has shaped me in some way. The knowledge that what we have to do is make sure that we do not equate not knowing a named language with lack of intelligence, right? That people can do a lot more, but that by restricting the way in which they use language, we're also restricting their opportunities. So maybe that's the first one. Then I went to high school. Okay. And I was okay, but in standardized tests, I couldn't compete with English speakers, monolingual English speakers, even though I did very well, sort of, in conversation, even in classroom instruction, because I was a good student. I did my work. And so I tested so low that they put me in the lowest English class. And then, basically what we were doing there were a lot of mechanical exercises. And a lot of just grammar, and we read novels, but it was always like, who was the character, when were they doing something, what were they doing, what, so it was always very factual. We used to get tests on facts in the novel. And I had a wonderful teacher as a sophomore in the second year of high school, and she was a wonderful English teacher, and she realized there was something to me that was beyond what they were doing. And this was a remedial class, and she convinced someone that they should accept me into the more advanced class in junior year. So this is my third year. And I went into that English class, and I realized what they were doing was something completely different from what we were doing in English. I mean, in our class in English, they were just asking factual questions. In that class, they were doing things that I thought everybody was crazy, because they were talking about what you would do if you were the character, and did this character act well, and it was a totally different discourse, because it wasn't mechanical. It was about thinking. It was about putting yourself in that situation. It was about the literary text and what literary mechanisms were used. And so it made me realize, well, a subject like English is not the same for some people than for others. It's a completely different kind of thing. And again, I thought, okay, everybody should be entitled to this rich instruction instead of to the remedial instruction.
The third question I'm going to ask is a little bit long, so please bear with me. What type of bilingual theories are practiced in the school systems nowadays, and what type of extra support do bilingual students need in schools that regular students don't? Can these theories use improvement? What does your ideal bilingual education look like?
I think the most important thing to remember about any kind of bilingual student is that what they have are resources. And usually the way in which we look at bilingual students is that what they have are problems, right? And they're seen as they have something missing. There's a deficiency of some sort. And if we did not look at that, but we looked at what they bring that is different, that we don't know about, I think we would be a much richer society, because we would understand different conceptualizations, different ways of looking that we don't realize when we're just seeing the world with one lens, right? I mean, we need to really expand our lens and see our world from very, very different lenses. So I think that's what the first thing that I would say, that we need to just change the lens with which we look at bilingual students, and look at the fact that they have these incredible resources, that if only we brought them forth and saw ourselves as learners instead of as people that always have to teach them, I think we would really gain a lot as society. So I don't think they need extra support except socially, in the sense that they have to be recognized as people who know. And of course, if you're talking about those students who are developing English in the United States, who are immigrants, who are newcomers, who are refugees, they need some support to bring up their language ability, their English language ability, and therefore they need teachers who understand them and programs that are going to give them the attention that they need. But what they don't need is remediation. They need a rich type of program and teachers who understand and want to be co-learners rather than just teachers. I don't think they're ideals. I know that the scholarly literature talks a lot about models. Even in some of my books, I've had to cover them because otherwise people don't understand them. But I don't think that there's an ideal because every situation is different. Every classroom is different. Every place in the world is different. And what you really have to do is have a program that builds from the students up instead of thinking, well, this is a model and this is what we need to impose on the population. Not everybody can do the same thing. Now, if you ask me what makes people bilingual, of course, what makes people bilingual is to have an educational program that develops their bilingualism, that supports their biliteracy, and that has them work through two languages, and that does this consistently, just like we do in English only, right? I mean, we don't stop taking English classes when we finish high school. We take them in college because every situation is different and we need to continue developing it. So if you're interested in developing bilingualism, which I think we all should be, or multilingualism, then you need to continue it as long as possible and make that a possibility for students. So that's what I would say about what ideal means to me.
The fourth question I'm asking is, what is the relevance of translanguaging to bilingual education, why and how, and what does bilingual education really mean in today's globalized world?
I think the relationship of translanguaging to bilingual education is important because some people may see translanguaging as a threat to bilingual education, and it's only because bilingual education in many ways, sometimes in some places, has been constructed and developed as two separate worlds that never touch, right? So that English is taught one day and Chinese is taught the other day, and it never comes together. And translanguaging came from the bilingual world. So it is definitely it's a bilingual approach. As a matter of fact, translanguaging was coined in Wales among Welsh educators who were really tired of having the Welsh students do a lesson in Welsh and a lesson in English when they were going to be bilingual. So they started experimenting with having lessons in which in the same lesson the students were reading in one language, for example, and writing in another language, or they were speaking in one language and then reading in the other language, so that there was some sort of relationship between all the features of their language repertoire, which of course were two named social constructions, but that for them was their own repertoire. So that I think translanguaging is very important to bilingual education. I think there are some settings in which bilingual education is done with such strict separation between languages that that they don't understand the role of translanguaging. And I want to be careful about what I'm saying here, because there are situations where socially you need to protect in some way the minoritized language, the endangered language. For example, sign languages need to be protected in some way. And there has to be a space in which there is input in that language and there is output, that students are practicing their language practices through that language. So that space has to occur. But there also has to be a space in which the students are allowed to be bilingual, where they can see their language repertoire in relationship to each other, in interrelationship, where they can see the transformative part of translanguaging and not just as a scaffold. So there's a very important role for translanguaging in bilingual education. But there has to be some transformation of the language allocation policies, because it is indeed a way to make people bilingual, but it's a way to make people bilingual that sometimes does not coincide with the way that the languages are, the programs are structured, right? So you need to do both. It isn't one or the other. You have to be able to tend to the 2 named languages, or the 3 named languages, or the 4 named languages, and to protect them in some way. And you also have to protect the student. I think this is a big shift, right? The big shift is not thinking about teaching the language, but teaching the student. And there's a very big difference between teaching the student bilingually, which is human-based, or teaching the language so that the student can become bilingual. So I think we need to make that shift to make sure that translanguaging fits within the bilingual education paradigm.
And the last question I'm going to ask is, what are you currently researching at the moment? And what are some of your current findings?
So currently my research is, we've had a very, very big project at CUNY, at the CUNY Grad Center, Graduate Center, that we call CUNY, which stands for City University of New York, New York State Initiative on Emergent Bilinguals, NYSIEB. And you can look it up on the website. We have lots of resources, lots of products for teachers and for people who want to learn more about the work. And the work in the last few years for me has been with how translanguaging is used by teachers, taken up by teachers, and taken up by students. And when it fails, when it is that people resist it, and why. And so that has been most of my research. In the last year or so, I have become, by the way, I do want to say that this is a large effort of a large team of people. It's collaborative. I'm one of many. And so it's a wonderful group of people that work together. Mostly CUNY faculty and CUNY research assistants, and then some teachers. In the last year or so, I have become very interested in doing precisely what you asked me about before, thinking about how translanguaging can work in bilingual education classrooms, and building what I call a translanguaging space, right, or what we call a translanguaging space, which is done jointly with the space for English and the space for the additional language, right? And how teachers work within that space, which is a more transformative space. It's not using the other language for scaffolding or for support, but it's actually thinking of authorizing translanguaging practices that are so much a part of multilingual communities. That's what usually happens in bilingual communities. It's the way that we communicate usually, because we don't have to select in the same ways we select when we're speaking to monolinguals, where we constantly have to select. But what happens in that transformative space? How do you use it to transform students' ideas about their own language practices, so they don't experience the linguistic insecurity that often minoritized students have? So that is the goal. How do you build that space and how does that work? So that's the goal right now.
Thank you very much for giving the interview with us.